We have with us today to start off Jonathan Roberts, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Dotdash. He's been with Dotdash for a decade, but before that, the most interesting thing about Jonathan is that he is a trained theoretical physicist who, before all of the work walking into publishing, focused on making dark matter predictions for the Hadron Collider. So this is going to be an interesting take on data. Please welcome Jonathan.
It is, oh, there we go, that's a little loud. It is an obvious background for somebody working in media to have come from a decade of dark matter predictions for the Hadron Collider. There's actually a few more of us out there than you might think. Chris Wiggins at the Times is a tenured professor in applied math. We've got Haile Owusu at Warner Media, who's a solid-state physicist. We're actually everywhere. It's a very small, very fun community. They're good friends. So before we jump into fixing all of the web, right, which we're going to get done in the next 30 minutes, hold with me, we're going to get into what we have fixed in the last 10 years, or what we've been working on fixing in the last 10 years. For those who haven't tracked the history of this, and that wouldn't be too surprising, back in 2013, IAC bought About.com from the New York Times. And About.com used to be the mining company all the way back in 1996, right? This is not even Internet 1.0, this is Internet 0.1, right? About.com actually rented server space in the Chelsea building in the server room that they built to a small West Coast search engine in 1998. That search engine was called Google, and that is now the Google building. So we talk about old media, the magazines that go back hundreds of years. About.com is that, but for the internet. Right? It goes right back to the very first days. The new management came in after IAC did the acquisition. That whole period of 2013 to 2015 that is very abbreviated on here is when everything went horribly wrong. Right? We did everything badly. We took all the sins that publishers take, and we learned that they didn't work. And then we found something that did work because we realized About.com was the wrong site for the modern internet, right? The world didn't need About.com anymore. And so we tore it apart and we rebuilt it from the ground up. Right? We took a 100 million unique Comscore site, one of the absolute foundational .coms of the internet, and we retired it. And we launched very well The Balance and LifeWire and The Spruce and TripSavvy and many more over this period, right? And they worked. We were able to create completely new domains and completely new brands, and they started growing incredibly quickly. And we realized we were onto something, right? That we actually, having done everything wrong for 2 or 3 years, we finally landed on a total pivot from what we'd been doing, and we'd found a model that worked, and these sites grew, and they took off. Then IAC said, can you fix something you didn't break yourselves? And that's when we picked up Investopedia, right? Which was a very similar kind of site, right? It's service journalism, it helps people. It's a huge reference site. It's actually kind of the quiet secret of Wall Street. All the traders have it up on their desktops at work, which makes reading the traffic patterns on Investopedia fascinating. And it worked too, right? We took it over in 2018. We ran the same playbook. It started to grow. And then we picked up Birdie, we picked up Brides from Condé, thanks Deb. We picked up Liquor, we picked up Tree Hugger, we did Simply Recipes and Serious Eats in the middle of COVID, and they all grew, right? And we were able to increase traffic 10%, 50%, 100%, 150%, right? These sites just took off. And that gave us a huge chunk of momentum running through, actually through into and past COVID. And then in December 2021, we acquired Meredith. As many of you will know, that is not just one brand sitting in that bullet point at the end here. Each of the ones before this is an individual domain that we spent 6 months or a year pulling in, overhauling, replatforming, going through the content, stripping out anything that's bad, moving it onto one CMS, moving it onto one ad stack, onto one tech stack. We picked up Meredith in 2021, multiple offices across the country, multiple print magazines, and dozens of household name websites. And through the end of last year, through all of last year, we ended up, through the summer, replatforming one site a week. Our dev teams almost wanted to kill us. But we did it. We got through the entirety, the core of all of the big sites on Meredith last summer. And to give you an idea, this was like, replatform a site, give ourselves a week off, launch People magazine, carry on the next week with all recipes. Like, it was a wild ride last summer. And it was a lot, right? Because not only are you rebuilding these sites, putting them on a new platform, overhauling the content, building new websites, and we did an ad stack unification last summer, which is always exciting and fun. We were also trying to bring together two very disparate cultures, two very disparate companies. We went from just a New York-based company with the Dotdash team, but it's a nationwide business for Meredith, right? In Des Moines, in Alabama, out in LA, right? It's a big company with a lot of people. And we were doing it coming off the back of COVID, right? So not only were we dealing with the integration of two companies, we were also dealing with all the pain I know everyone here has dealt with the repercussions, the knock-on effects of trying to build and rebuild culture as we come back from the pandemic. I'm very, very glad to say we did almost all the integration work last year, which meant that by the time we get to this year, we get to move to building, which is much more fun. And the nice thing is, it worked. Of the Meredith businesses that were replatformed last year, pretty much all of them are at or above our forecast for growth this year. And those forecasts aren't like 2 or 3 or 5% growth. Like, we're talking 20, 30, 40, 50% growth curves that we're on. And it's working across the board, right? Whichever vertical we're in, the playbook works. So here's the playbook, and it is shockingly simple. And if you've been following Neil Vogel or Alicia or the others, this is something you will hear over and over and over again for us, right? Fast sites, best content, no bad ads, right? It's not a complicated thing to say, but there's a lot buried in here. Faster sites just means if you have a site that loads in 12 seconds and you're on a phone, you're done, right? Somebody left your site already 11 seconds ago. So we pulled the 12-second load time back to 1 second. You don't just do that, right? That's not some magical tech wizardry that allows us. There's a little bit of magical tech wizardry in there, to be fair. But a lot of it is saying all of the one lines of JavaScript that people pitch you, they all come with a cost. And the cost comes to the user. So what we did when we were doing the replatform, we didn't start with saying, okay, let's figure out which of these things we can lose. We started with, there are none. Now let's figure out which things have to be on the page and where on the page do they need to be. And we started with things like, do we need the ComScore pixel? Do we need the Facebook pixel? Can they be lazy loaded until the page is loaded? Because you know what? Our users don't need a ComScore pixel. We need it, but that shouldn't get in the way of somebody getting to content that helps them deal with a medical condition, right? That should come first. Tracking cookies. All the JavaScript that comes with the ad tech overhead is huge and very painful, and it slows down the site. So we tried to clean as much of it out as possible and then only start putting back in the things that we knew we had to have. Best content. As a publisher, this feels like it should be a given, right? But a lot of the rest of this talk is going to talk about the fact that publishing has in many ways lost its way around the focus and the value of content investment. So we dramatically increased the investment on the Meredith properties from what had been possible before, just because of the history of print and digital and the family and all the rest of it. But it also means don't have bad content, right? Trim the library, get rid of all of the long tail stuff that shouldn't be there, right? Things that you can't maintain, things you can't keep up to date. Something you wrote 2 years ago and the world has changed. If you can't afford to update it, don't have it. It doesn't have any value there. So in every single case, we've dramatically trimmed the portfolio of content that we have on these sites. And we haven't really taken much of a hit to traffic in the process, but traffic has started to grow afterwards, right? Because what's there is good. And no bad ads. This one could be seen as a dig at advertising. It's actually not. It's a dig at publishers. There are bad ads on the internet, not because they work for advertisers, it's because they work for publishers. Right? An interstitial, where the X is a picture of an X, not an actual X, right, which creates a click rather than actually being a click, that's not generating value for advertisers, right? You are faking that engagement. You're creating a click for the publisher. So we can't go around pointing at the rest of the world saying, oh, advertising makes our sites bad. It's like, no, we made our sites bad. Because the way that publishers, in many cases, have had to run their business model is, okay, let's prioritize revenue for the publisher first, because that's always been a challenge, and we have to pay our staff, and we have to pay our shareholders, and our holding companies, and all the rest of it. And we're going to then say, if our publisher revenue is first, we'll do what we can that isn't going to annoy our advertisers too much, right? Give them a level of pain they'll accept. This is why viewability is a measure we all have to hold to, because publishers didn't, right? There were off-page ads that were loading, and so viewability is now a standard that everyone abides by, right? And then the third constituency is users. So if it's publisher revenue first, then advertisers, then a distant third is users. And this is why we have the internet we deserve, right? Because that's how we prioritize product roadmaps. And that is really bad. If you open your laptop and any major publisher in Q4, your laptop battery will run out. Your data plan on your phone will get crushed. Because there is always one more line of JavaScript. There is always one more ad. There is always one more pixel that comes with the promise of 1 more cent on the dollar on that session on that day. So we took the opposite approach and said, our core mission as our kind of publisher is to help people. Right? People come to us because they have challenges, because they have problems, because they're looking for inspiration, because they're looking to do something. Right? If you're coming to Better Homes and Gardens, you are looking to do something. If you're coming to Verywell or Health.com, you are definitely looking to solve a problem. If we help our users, they do something. If our users do something, they don't do it with us, right? We don't prescribe drugs, we don't build investment apps, we don't actually renovate your home. So we will always have to hand you off to somebody to do that with. And if we've helped you make the decision, and we hand you off to the partner who's going to help you do it, right? Whether it's via a display ad, a brand ad, a lead, it's going to work for our advertisers. It's going to work really well for our advertisers and our partners. Now, if it works for our users and then they go do the things that work for our advertisers, then it definitely works for us as a publisher. So this isn't some high-minded philosophical approach to fixing the internet and having no ads. This is a way to run a growing profitable publisher that also works for users. Now that is a fun world to be in. It was quite a bet to take when it was about.com, we tore it apart and rebuilt it from the studs. It was a huge bet to take when we picked up the biggest digital and print publisher in the world. And it worked. It's the biggest destruction testing of publishing ever undertaken on the internet. I'm really glad it's 2023. 2022 was a beast. When we're off the record over lunch, I'm happy to answer all of the questions about the stuff that happened last year. So what did that get us? Okay, so here's where we are, right? This is the biggest print and digital publisher in the world. There are brands on here you know really well. There are brands on here that you're probably not as familiar with. There are many brands that aren't on here that are still part of the portfolio. There's only so much space on this slide. All of them are owned and operated. All of them are our own content. We invest into that. We manage the writers, the illustrators, the photographers, the editors who put their work into all this content every day. And we're at around 170, 180 million uniques, right? We are now a platform scale publisher. It's the first time that's ever been created, which allows us to ask some really interesting questions. If you've built a platform scale publisher, what can you suddenly do that hasn't been done before? So this talk was about fixing the web, not about fixing Meredith. So this was just the lead into it, because this year, having done the fixing of Meredith last year, mostly, we got to turn our attention outside our walls and say, what did we learn that we can actually take a run at next? And because we have the scale that we have found some things in that whole process of last year which are really interesting and give us a path forward for ourselves. And I think are lessons that we can share across publishing and hopefully are useful to some other people out here as well. So it's not like we're the first people to notice that web advertising is broken, right? This is not a new statement, right? This is a well understood, well known, well trodden path. This is something we've talked about over drinks, over dinner. But there's a couple of things here that are worth just going back to and doubling down on. So cookie deprecation is driving up costs and decreasing the impact of purchasing power. Fair enough. Marketers are worried. Yes, totally fair. And Apple obviously took away half the internet's targeting capabilities. But I just want to go back to the cost one quickly, because there's an interesting thread here that we started pulling, which is costs are going up. Advertisers are saying advertising on the internet is getting too expensive. Now, for the publishers in the room, I'm sure you're thrilled that your CPMs have doubled or tripled, right? The exact opposite is happening, right? Rates are, according to Google, down 10, 15% in Q1, right, year over year. So how is it that advertising costs have gone through the roof and rates to publishers are down? Right, those two things, on the face of it, are counterintuitive. They seem almost contradictory. But I'm sure everyone here knows exactly what's going on, which is if you shrink the target market and you put the same number of dollars through it, cost will go up, right? Just supply and demand. That does not mean there's more dollars going to publishers, right? It just means that the market gets much more concentrated, and there's a lot of much cheaper audience out there that nobody is targeting. So we sit on top of 30 million visits a day, hundreds of millions of ad calls. We have partnerships with all the big SSPs and DSPs out there, right? We have TAM and Open Bidding and AdX and client-side integrations and the whole host of it. So we just started downloading about 1% of all of our bid data from all the auctions to see what was going on. And it's interesting because Google can't see this because they just see the AdX world, right? Obviously GAM sees everything, but they see what you pass in. Amazon doesn't see this, right? They just see TAM. Our client-side integrations, all the individual SSPs, just see what they see. So we realized that suddenly we had a front row seat to the entire ad market that was unique to us and actually uniquely broad. So we can actually look at this and say, wait a minute, just how concentrated is this? What really is the level of concentration and cost that's being driven? So here's a day of data from Dotdash Meredith, right? And it's one day, but it's very, very stable over time. And I'll explain this pretty carefully because there's actually a lot in here. So this is bucketed into the number of our client-side SSPs that bid on an individual cookie, right? Or an individual user. Sorry, pre-gaming the conclusion here. We only have 6 SSPs integrated client-side. We find that if we add a 7th, performance degrades for our users and for advertising across the board, so there isn't just one more client-side integration we can go forth with, right? We can't do 10, 11, 12, right? We keep it to 6, and that means 1 in, 1 out, which our SSP partners really love. But it's important for us, for our users, right? 10% of our users are bid on by 100% of those SSPs, right? Which means that the DSPs that are passing through the demand all can see that user. And 30%, and this is just US, right? International, it's a varied and broader picture. 30%, not a single one of those client-side SSP returns a bid for. Nobody bids. Now, AdX and TAM, you'll pick up some demand there. AdX will eventually bid on more or less everything. But you can also see that there's a whole chunk where it's only 1 or 2 SSPs, right? Where they can identify some amount of information they can bid on a little bit, but those prices are very, very low. But as soon as you get to the point where 100% of the SSPs are bidding on those users, the prices rocket up. Those people are not bidding on a specific user, they're bidding on data, right? This isn't that the value is concentrated to the left here, it's that the data is concentrated to the left here. This is saying that of all those 6 client-side SSPs, they can all identify 10% of those users. And we will do the work, we haven't done it yet, but I'm gonna bet there's an overabundance of MSN, AOL, and Yahoo email addresses in that chunk to the left-hand side. And it costs 500% more. Now, I love being able to target, and track, and understand, and measure, and look at all the things. I don't love it enough to spend 5 times more money on it. Now, if you're on Investopedia and you're reading about mutual funds, you could be anywhere on this chart, but somebody's only going to bid on you if you're on the left-hand side. If you're on Better Homes and Gardens looking at home renovations, you could be anywhere on this chart, right? On that content, you will see a chart just like this. But the market will only bid on people on the left-hand side. Now, that's not good for buyers, right? This is driving up costs, exactly that Digiday quote from the previous slide. It's definitely no good for publishers, right? There's a ton of value on the right-hand side of this chart that nobody's getting access to. But if you're a company that takes a percentage of CPMs as the way you get a fee, the left-hand side of this chart works great, right? The cost went up by 5x, your take rate goes up by 5x. That's amazing. The only piece of the market that has an incentive that aligns to this kind of behavior is the middle of the market, not the buy side or the sell side. So there's a level of market concentration here, which should, as an efficient market, be finding those efficiencies, right? If I can get somebody who is as valuable as the rest of the market and I can get them for 20 cents on the dollar, as a market, I should go do that, right? I should find my way to unlock the value in that audience. But the market's become so calcified around cookies and data that it's become this concentrated. And let's be clear, this is even before Google takes away cookies, right? It is broken now. It is not going to break next summer. It is broken right now. So what can we do about it, right? Some people would say, oh, this is the way programmatic's always worked, right? It's always been like this. It's always been broken. You can't do anything about it. Absolute nonsense. There's no reasonable way you can go ahead with that future at the moment. And it doesn't work like this, right? So this was just a thought experiment that we ran through internally to get our arms around this. Again, thought experiment, not real numbers, don't take it too seriously, but we'll just run through an example, right? If you are a person on the buy side and you have a perfect data set of 1 million individuals that you know, right? And you spent a lot of money building up a perfect data set. And you want to work with us, Dotdash Meredith, 30 million people a day, that should work, right? You've got a huge, rich data set. We have 10% of the US coming through our business every single day, right? So 10% of the US, 100,000 addressable audience every day, run it for 10 days, you reach your entire market, phenomenal, job done. That's how this should work. But it doesn't work like that because half of this audience is not targetable because it's iOS. So that's 50,000 people a day. And then you have a match rate, right? Can you actually match the people that you know to the people that we know? Optimistically, those match rates are around 10%, right, on a good day. So that 50,000 people a day now goes down to 5,000 people a day. Throw a $20 CPM on that, that's $100 of inventory we've just created. So we spent billions of dollars building the biggest publisher in the world. The buy side spent billions of dollars building million-person data sets that are perfectly clean. And we have successfully created $100 of addressable inventory. Did we do this right? I think we may not have done this right. I don't think this works. And it's not a future thing, that's a today thing. Those 100,000 people are still there every day. But the way the market works means it's 5,000 people that we believe are there. So what do people do? Well, you can invest a ton of money in new ID solutions. That is just saying that we're going to fix the problem the same way that we created the problem. That's not going to work. That's fingerprinting, it's creepy retargeting, it's a whole bunch of things that are going to be very, very fragile. We will all do all of them over the next year or two as we navigate the change that's coming, but it is not the answer. If you're a buyer, you say, well, I can't just buy on one publisher, I have to buy the entire internet because that's the only way I'm going to maximize my match rate across this audience. So now you're in all the long-tail made-for-advertising sites out there, right? You can't run a premium publisher because your match rates are so low that you can't reach most of your audience. So it's not brand safe anymore. Or you make sure that your 1 million people that you've got actually need to be 10 million people. So you build lookalikes. And you rely on partners to build lookalikes, but you can't interrogate how that lookalike was built. So you homeopathically dilute your audience until it's just that one drop of perfect audience swilling in a glass full of invisible cookies, so that you can claim you're reaching all the people you're looking for because they kind of look like the person you started with. All of these things spread dollars across the whole internet, right, rather than allowing you to run it on any particular publisher. It runs from a basis that you think that the data you're using is actually the data that's going to drive performance, but then you dilute it to show that it actually isn't that. So it's not going to be using the right data, it's not going to be running in the right places, and you're still missing most of your audience. Like, this is the ecosystem we're currently working in. Right? This does not work for the buy side, and it does not work for publishers. And it's just a bad way of targeting. Because at the heart of this, the principle is, if I know what you read 2 months ago, I know more about you right now than you know about yourself. Just think through that statement a little bit, right? Because that's what Meta sold us 15 years ago, right? And we've never really come to terms with the fact that that was never true. But that's still what retargeting and then diluted lookalike retargeting and then just pure guesswork is actually doing, right? Saying if I can attach enough data to a cookie, I can know more about you right now than you know about yourself. That wasn't true when we had 100% of the internet with cookies. It's definitely not true now. I don't care who you were. I only care about who you are right now. Because you right now are a very different person to who you were last night on Bourbon Street, right? Just gonna say it. When you were axe throwing. You're a different person right now with different needs, different wants, different interests. I ran our health and finance business for a long time. If you're looking at somebody who's reading about how to help their baby latch at 3 a.m. on their phone, they're not the same person who was looking up home renovation or decorating or White Lotus reviews yesterday. If I interstitial you with a White Lotus interstitial whilst you're actually trying to solve a health problem at 3 a.m. on your phone, I should be fired. But that's how this works. Because everyone says that data trumps what you're actually needing to do right now, all day long. So, we have the advantage of this huge scale and this huge audience, and we have the advantage of content that tells me right now what you are trying to do. So, what we did was we built a tool called Decipher, and it's actually shockingly simple, right? It leans into what we do. It leans into being a publisher. It's all intent-based, right? The content you're on right now tells me exactly what you are trying to do. So I can just reach you with the ad on the content. I need no cookies, I need no data. I just need to know what you're reading. So there's no cold start problem. It's 100% addressable. And all I'm saying is what you're reading right now tells me exactly what you are trying to do. It's all around expert-written content. It doubles audience scale, actually more than doubles audience scale because it unlocks all of iOS, right? It's trivial to target somebody on a mutual fund article, whatever device they're on, that doesn't matter. And we guarantee performance, because if we do it this way, it's gonna beat the cookie targeting, the ID targeting, the homeopathically diluted lookalike signals that are out there that people are currently relying on. And it's really transparent, right? If somebody is reading home entertainment on Real Simple, they're interested in home entertaining, right? It's wild to be standing here in 2023 and saying that this is a new idea, right? It's really not a new idea. What's new is the scale that we can do it at, right? So if we're reaching home entertainers on Real Simple, we also know that we talk a lot about home entertaining across the spruce heats and all recipes and food and wine and travel and leisure and better homes and gardens and in-style, right? This is a huge portfolio. And because we had 11 billion people visit Meredith last year, and we have all of that data sitting under the hood, we can say people who are reading about home entertaining are also really likely to be interested in reading about traveling to restaurants, right? Those are destination travel people, right? And we're able to pick apart those insights across 100 million connections across 1.5 million articles, right? Which means we're never doing run of site or run of content or run of network. We can just do run of home entertainers. And this isn't, oh, I know you read this, so I'm going to target you tomorrow, which is what everyone immediately latches onto. It's like, no, we don't need to do that because we can double, triple, or 10x your scale, so we can be so much more precise in targeting the content, and it just works. Like, this seems very simple, but to get to something like this, you say, well, what's step one? Step one is spend $2.7 billion buying Meredith. Step 2 is re-platform the entire business. Step 3 is put it on the same ad stack. Step 4 is make sure all the content is organized in a clean and simple way. Step 5 is do all the math on those 11 billion visits. And then the last step is, build a simple tool that everyone can use so you can just go target all the content. And it works. So if it didn't work, we wouldn't be here talking about it. We've done a lot of side-by-side tests. This is a particular example. We were working with a CPG company. It was CPG Beauty. We got access to the baseline campaign they were running on Run of Internet, right? So exactly that thing of layer on blue sky data, go run across the whole internet because you can't get scale on one publisher, and get a level of performance, right? That's the gray bar at the bottom. And then we took away all of that data and we only ran on the content. And we only ran on sections that were absolutely relevant to what they were looking to sell. And the conversion rate went up 126%. Right? When we get ID targeting right, we get lifts of like 15-ish%, 10-15% when we get cookie targeting really on the nose. When we get intent targeting right, we see lifts of 100, 200, 300%. Right? And we can charge a premium because the performance is there. Right, so rather than the single-digit CPMs that are run of internet, right, the bottom bar, you can charge premium CPMs in the double digits, and you can actually reduce the cost to the client. Because the performance is so strong, in this case, we brought down the cost per outcome by 40%. And this isn't saying we shouldn't do cookie targeting. Obviously, everyone will still do cookie targeting. There's a huge industrial effort, and everyone's campaigns are very mature around cookie targeting, and they should be, and they will continue to be. And we'll work through all the identity challenges because targeting is only half of it, and measurement is the other half. We have to do both. But when we do both, we will guarantee that when you get rid of all of that data, and you actually target the person at the right time in the moment they're in, based on a signal of what they want to do right now, it will work better. We will guarantee that. And the last piece of this is just to say, and this is publishing getting back to its roots. We spent 20 years forgetting that the content has value. We all as an industry said, the value on the internet is the cookie and the ID and the data. We got very hooked on the data. All right? As a scientist for 10 years, I don't give a damn about that data. I actually don't believe it has value. Or certainly not enough, right? Because all of the incentives and the structures there are to dilute it, because you can't actually interrogate what is in those data sets. This is simple. This is saying if we write great content, we help people. If we help people and we put the right partner beside it, it's going to work. It's the simplest outline in the world, but it suddenly means that investing in content is a good business decision. The content will drive the outcome. Thanks a lot.
Stay right. Jonathan, stay right there, because I want to see if we have questions.
Hi, Joe Mandisi from Media Post. Congratulations on reinventing contextual targeting. So my question, I have a lot of questions, but I'll follow up with you later. The one for this now is, how do you know they're addressable? And how do you know they're uniques?
Got it. So the addressability just comes from the fact that when we're running the targeting, right, if we go back to here, I'm saying every single person that comes to one of these sections of the site can be targeted at the moment that they arrive.
But how do you know that's the same unique user and it's not a multiple repeat visitor?
No, absolutely true. So we obviously run our own first-party cookies on our own sites, so we have some amount of measure of tracking people over time, right? Domain to domain, that's a little complicated, but we can still do that these days on most of our audience. But I'd also say that if a person comes to one of these sites today, right, if you're saying, I'm reading about summer cocktails in the Spruce Eats today, and 2 days from now, they're on cocktail attire and in style, I'd actually argue that's still the right person to go reach, right? The retargeting piece is actually what's driving so much of that, like, I don't want to see the same person over and over again. No, if you're the same person and you're reading these two things, I would argue that's exactly where you should be running your ad, right? You shouldn't really be worrying about repeat visitors as much as you are, because we're not chasing somebody around with the bass fishing lure all over the internet. That is exactly not what we're doing.
Just last question, Paul. Can you extend that into the whole ecosystem? Like,
Yeah.
Can you,
Ask that question so that.
yeah, can you extend that into the whole ecosystem in the sense that you could help your customers dedupe and get incremental reach across so that they're not, you know, redundantly targeting people?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two particular ways. Firstly, the question about incrementality, right? Can you find incremental reach? And what I would say here is, as soon as you're unlocking any cookieless audience with a unique signal, it's incremental reach, right? Just going back to that market concentration, the market is so concentrated that any version of targeting that isn't just doubling down on what everyone's already doing is incremental. Like that chart where everyone's bidding on 10% of users is like watching 6-year-olds play soccer. Right? Everyone's clustered around the ball. Right? It's this wide open field, and the goal's right there. So just by changing tactic and having a differentiated way to target, it's incremental reach. And that's not just for us, right? I'd say all publishers in the room have a unique understanding of their audience that is different to how the world is targeting. If you bring your understanding of your audience to the market, that is a unique and differentiated incremental way to help your clients reach their market, right? This is our particular version of it because this is the kind of publisher we are, but this is not a unique statement to us, right? As publishers, we should understand our audience better than anyone else. The world has forgotten that. So that's kind of the philosophical approach. I can talk about the other one offline.
Well, what is the value then of that user history, and where are you using it? I mean, first of all, there's a legacy of value in registering people for your site, and then there are a whole bunch of other marketing products that are tied to their user history. So can you tie this approach to that other legacy of registering users, maintaining a profile, that classic magazine list, and then being able to market to them based on that history?
Absolutely, right? So what I would say here is that single digits percentage of our users are registered, right? Whether that's through like deep reg on the site or with email lists or those like up to like 10 or 20% depending on how you want to classify a registration. That gives us some amount of value in a deep relationship with those users that is unique and special, right? We can do things with those users with that relationship that we can't do with other people. That will always be true, and it's always going to be a big piece of what we do. What I'm saying here is I can take all of the behavior of all of the people, right, and I can say, okay, I know if somebody read this here, right, on annuities, that the likelihood they would go read about a home purchase is actually super high, right? And so I can find these insights of these correlations from people who read this also read that across the entire network. And rather than worrying about an individual, right, and trying to make a prediction off what that one person did, I can take billions of user visits and I can generate insights, right? And so I can actually build insights around the world that are evergreen, right? Because once you've learned them, they don't really change that often. You can see them when they do. And that means I can use those insights for all of my audience, right? And so I'm not making a prediction about an individual of what they did today based on what they did last month. What I'm saying is I can tell you a lot about a person right now because I've seen everyone else who's ever done what they did, right? A great example is on our Variable Mind site where we deal with a lot of mental health. You can see a spike of people worrying about social anxiety and PTSD at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? Happens every single day, right? I don't need to predict whether you are going to wake up with PTSD nightmares at 3 a.m. I just need to tell you, I've seen everyone else do this, and I know everyone else who's had these needs at this point in time. I can help you better, because this might be the first time it's happened to you, but we have helped that person in that moment hundreds of thousands of times, right? And if we use that insight, we can be a better publisher.
It sort of sounds to me as if you're taking some of the principles of behavioral, which is really based on affinities, and folding it into this approach. So you're still using a lot of the principles of behavioral, just not using that kind of tracking and targeting on a user level.
It's a lot of the same technology lives under the hood, right? A lot of the same math that you use is there, but trade off the two situations, right? I make a prediction that you might have an infant child because of your reading behavior, and I go find you on, a sports website or when you're reading about TV shows, and that is creepy and invasive. Right. if I find out that the point that you have an infant child, you tend to be reading a lot about kids cooking on all recipes, and I know you're interested in, you know, infant fashion, right, on InStyle, true story, that's not creepy. It's not weird. It's not counterintuitive. It's not a surprise to see it there, right? So it's a totally different user experience, and it's not invasive, and it's evergreen, right? It'll last after the cookies go away.
That's what it sounds like to me, behavioral without the creepy.
Yeah, it's behavioral for insights, not for targeting, right? If we can understand the world better, we can just do a better job.
Jonathan, that was cool. Thank you so much.
No problem.